So I'm sitting here in the Redwood Forest, and what we've been doing is shooting this video series on why certain skill sets will make you more money, but also the massive ways that you self-sabotage yourself. The first video, what we talked about was the very practical skills that you could have to make a lot more cash and to be just more successful in general. In the second video, what I talked about is how you waste your time, why you waste your time, why most people are going to waste your time, why most of your thought capital and focus capital is going to be a waste of your time, and how to break out of that. In this video, what I'm going to do is talk about the reasons that people self-sabotage, and I'm going to give you some competing theories on why people self-sabotage. And this is going to seem a little bit out there, some of the things I'm going to talk about, but if you really study this for many years, you might wind up coming back to this video and saying, you know, when I first heard that, it sounded crazy, but over time, I don't have a better explanation. So let's crack into it. I'm going to talk about different biological reasons that people can self-sabotage. I'm going to talk about traumatic reasons that people self-sabotage, and I'm going to talk about what you might call spiritual reasons why people self-sabotage. So let me explain to you. Here we go. We got a lot of bugs out here, by the way. So we're going to knock this out. Let's get in the evening. We're going to crack on. So the first one's biological, and you could basically describe this as sort of a mating hierarchy kind of thing. So here's basically what it is. What you'll find is that if you feel safe in your tribe, so to speak, okay, if you feel safe and you feel like no one's going to come and attack you, your mind is going to sort of open up. It's going to take off this kind of fishbowl that your mind is in. Okay, now why would this fishbowl exist? This fishbowl exists because if you project your voice properly, if you become very charismatic and funny, if you carry yourself without a care in the world and are just free associating and flowing and projecting and putting out your energy, what it tends to do is attract people at a very high level. It gives you a lot of mating opportunities. And what can happen, say that we look back at our prehistory, is that if you began to mate with people and you didn't have hierarchy within your tribe, other people who might object to that might come and end your existence, right? So you might be mating with somebody, you know, you kind of hear somebody crawl up behind you and you're like, huh? And you look up and then you just see this rock just get bigger as it goes boink and lights out and you are done. That's the end of your life. So the way that our brains have adapted to this is that if we don't feel safe in an environment, we find that we struggle to talk, we struggle to project our voices, our vocal tone changes to where we have very approval-seeking vocal tonality to show that we're submissive, and we tend to become very reactive to other people. And what will generally happen at this point is that our mind will begin to shut down our own independent thinking, and we will look to people of authority and follow along with what it is that they're doing. So you might have it to where your voice is insanely projecting. Like you have an incredibly loud voice. You might have incredible lateral thinking. You might have the ability to be amazingly creative. You could be incredibly funny. But if you don't feel confident in yourself, you can't bring that stuff about, and so it shuts you down. So if you have the self-image of, say, a 5, then your mind allows you to think of creative things like what a 5 thinks like. If you have the self-image of a 5, your mind lets you project your voice like a 5. If you have the self-image of a 5, your voice will show the authority of a 5. If you have the self-image of a 5, you'll tend to be very reactive to other people and care too much what they think because you're trying to compensate. If you have the self-image of a 5, your mind won't let your mental bandwidth of the types of thoughts that it will let you have outside of what it is that you're told to think. Meanwhile, if you go to a 7, then it goes up from there. If you go up to a 10, then it goes up from there. So the challenge is, as far as self-sabotage, is that if you believe that you're somebody who's a 5, you have a biological fear to make more money than what a 5 would make. You have a biological fear to have a dating life better than someone who is a 5 would have. And when you're hearing this, you're thinking, is that really true? Here's how I know it's true. For many years, I've done social experiments, and I'd go out to bars and clubs, for example, and, you know, I might be nervous to talk to people. But then if I would just go talk to a few people, I would find my voice opening up, and I'd be getting a lot more funny. Literally, and I kid you not, right in the environment, this is when I was new, right in the environment where I had talked to a bunch of people and I felt safe. So it might be, say, right here, surrounded by about, 10 or 20 feet or something. But then as soon as I would leave the 10 or 20 feet that I had established that everybody around me here was cool to me, then I would feel that my voice would go back down, my thoughts would go back down, I wouldn't be able to be as funny. You probably had it where you're meeting someone you're attracted to, and it just is more and more difficult to think of what to say, and you're thinking, maybe if I just read online something to say, and they just gave me what to say, then I would be okay. But in reality, of course, that won't work because your vocal tone will be off, your body language will be off, your demeanor will be off, your vibe will be off, but you're thinking that you can find this perfect little trick. So that is why we tend to self-sabotage, because if we get a better opportunity than we think that we're capable of handling as far as our status, it freaks us out in a major way. And so what winds up happening is that you have selective focus, you have the entire breadth of opportunities that are in front of you, but if any of those opportunities could lead you to becoming a 10 when you view yourself as a 5, you won't allow yourself to see it. Your brain will actually screen it out. So that's the first reason why we can have these tremendous success barriers. This gets very, very difficult because if you yourself are trying to cultivate some of those very high earning potential or high dating potential habits that I talked about in the first video today, I just shot this earlier today, then if you have a self-image as somebody who's lower, it's very, very difficult to do that because of this mating component that I talked about. So that's one angle of how you could look at it. And you'll really see this because, again, if you practice going out and socializing, you're going to initially have these experiences where people are just kind of randomly nice to you, and then your voice opens up, your body language opens up, your creativity opens up, your public speaking opens up, you become this epic orator, all this crazy stuff happens, and everybody's loving you, and then you'll find that you lose it. And that's kind of why you get obsessed with learning social skills, because you want to kind of stabilize that lightning in a bottle. We've all been there, right? And for many, many years, what I've experienced is that I go out and I have that, and then what I try to do is I try to replicate that again and again until it wasn't coming from people's responses to me, but it was something internal. And we'll cover that in many other videos. How do you make that shift? But I just want you to understand this principle for now of success barriers. Now, the next success barrier that you might have heard of is this idea of trauma. And the trauma idea of success barrier is the idea that, say that you're traumatized when you're a kid, that actually creates, this is really deep, and I'm going to be skimming over a lot of content here, like a 100-hour seminar just sort of waved off in like 10 seconds. But basically what happens is that, say that you have a trauma where you're used to being ignored. Let's say you're used to being abandoned, or let's say you're used to being lashed out at. Well, that trauma actually takes its own life in your own body, and it wants to be re-traumatized so that it can stay alive. Again, I'm super duper glossing over so much content here. And so what the trauma does is it actually hijacks your brain, much like the mating brain hijacking where it distorts perception. The trauma hijacks your brain and will try to put you into situations again and again and again where you can relive that trauma. Some people would say it is for the purpose of resolving it. Other people would say it simply has a life of its own and that you want to diffuse it and release it. But whatever the case, notice that perception is being altered. Okay, so that's another major aspect of one. Now, another one is also emotional addictions. And what that would be is that, let's say that you're just used to being angry all the time. Or let's say that you're used to not being too happy, or so on and so forth. Well, then what winds up happening there is that will build synaptic pathways in the brain. And as it builds those synaptic pathways, what's going to wind up happening is that your brain is just used to going into anger, or used to going into sadness, or used to going into lack. And it just sort of defaults there. You can see this because somebody who's happy could have something bad happen. And what winds up happening is they'll be sad for a sec, but then they'll quickly go back to being happy. Somebody who's used to being sad, you could crack a joke with them and they're just like, I'm mad. And you say a joke, they're kind of like, and then they go back to being sad. You should tangibly be able to look at somebody and see what kind of synaptic pathways, what kind of emotional synaptic pathways are operating in their brain. And if you look at that, you get a sense of it, you can see who they are, and you can kind of see what they're going to default back to. Now, the last one that I'm going to explain here is the spiritual component. So this one is probably the wackiest of any of them. What I want you to do is imagine that at one point in your soul's existence, you're connected to your creator. And then you threw a temper tantrum like, say, a teenager, and you're like, you know what, Daddy? I'm running away. And so you run away to Earth. And what you do is that the light of your creator is so beautiful. Life would be so amazing if you just went into the light, because you'd get present, you'd be tapped in, you'd have all this energy, all of these different talents that you didn't know you have. Your whole life would open up. But in order to deny that, what you do is you find basically co-drug addicts, co-enablers. And it's almost like in a crack house when people are smoking crack and they're passing the rock and then they're fighting with each other. What you're basically doing is that you're finding other co-enablers to pass the rock to and with. And what you'll do is you'll kind of like fight with each other. Maybe you'll make little beefs. Maybe you'll sit there complaining to each other. Maybe you'll talk to each other about how you're a victim. Maybe you'll get involved in a political party that's attacking the other political party. And the idea of it is to emphasize separateness. And so it's this idea that rather than you being connected to source, that you're just this separate little creature that's just stuck down here on Earth, and you're not going to go back. And the light to go back is so beautiful that you need to fight with people, and you need to have opponents, or you need to feel like you're the best of anyone, or that you're the biggest victim and you suck the most of anyone, or whatever it is. But you're finding ways to hold yourself here. So notice what's happening here. Let's have a look at this again. We looked at biological, we looked at trauma, we looked at emotional addictions, emotional superhighways, we looked at the spiritual component. There's so much of this that you could talk about, but end of the day, it's funny because I started off today, when I was just with my kids up at the river there, I started off today by talking about who it is that I could hire. Who can I give a 5-figure-a-year job, a 6-figure-a-year job, a 7-figure-a-year job, or beyond? And also, how would you become someone who could build that up yourself and eventually scale, get your rates up, build businesses, get investments, invest in your own skills, and so on and so forth? Well, what you're really seeing here is why people will say you can't change people. Okay, it is an addiction. If somebody is just addicted to being a 5 out of 10, it is very, very hard to change that. If somebody has trauma in them and they haven't resolved that trauma, it is very, very hard to change that. Even when they say, I just want real love, I just want a low drama person, they're lying. The 10% of the logical mind wants real love and a low drama person, but their energetic system that's traumatized is refeeding the trauma. You could have those emotional addictions. If you've got this whole synaptic pathway superhighway in your mind, and that's just there, it's very, very hard for somebody to change that. So if they're stuck at being a 5-figure earner and, to go to 6 figures, 7 figures, that's very, very tough. And likewise, if somebody at a spiritual level just wants to emphasize separateness, they're used to getting kind of like these little dopamine spikes by being better than another person or being a bigger victim than another person or being more oppressed than another person and so on and so forth. If they're hooked on that, again, it is very, very hard to change. So how does somebody change that? Where is there an opportunity to change that kind of that kind of thing that's going on in somebody's mind? Well, the way that I would describe it, and this is what they'll say in personal growth, is something called an opening. And what an opening means is that the person, it could be you, gets in so much pain that, frankly, all those different synaptic pathways and spiritual components and self-image and emotional addictions and all that, that gets outweighed by the extreme pain that you're in. So say that you're somebody who's like, I believe in love by just giving flowers and chocolates and sticky, icky, sweet, right? And then you get super dumped, and maybe the person that you were with winds up running off with somebody who's like a little bit more wild and kind of more in their natural essence than you. But you're like, no, I just want to be sticky sweet, right? Well, then at that point, you're willing to give up that limiting belief because it's caused you so much pain, whereas before you might have been identified with thinking that. Now you say to yourself, you know what? Forget about it. So it's like, this is like your core essence, and there's all these tethers that you have of emotional addictions, spiritually, trauma, status-wise, and it's all kind of locked in like this. And when you get in enough pain, it can slit that, and now you have the chance for a reset. So, like I said, this is why you generally can't change people. This is why if you were to give this video to a lot of people, literally their reticular activation system will tune it out. They will hate it. By the way, if somebody, this video is really not that complicated, so if you give this to somebody and you see them shaking and twitching and freaking out, in my view, that's the parasitic consciousness on their brain. That's the trauma. That's the synaptic pathways and so on and so forth that are hiding from the video. Like, you could probably send your friends way wackier or off-the-wall videos than this. It's just a nice video about issues that people have shot in the redwood forest. It's really not that big of a deal. But notice, you can tell this video is over the target. You can tell it's spot on when something as basic as what I'm saying, it's really not that complicated, has people freaking out. And that is because they're in their own little world, and something that would actually elevate them threatens that little world. So if you want to break out of this yourself, my recommendation to you is make a major, major effort to get to the point where you want a better life. And so you stop focusing on crap. You stop wasting your time. You stop being addicted to all these different things that you're addicted to. And you begin to do a real audit of what kind of status do you want to be addicted to? What kind of emotions do you want to be addicted to? What kind of trauma do you want to release? Spiritually, how do you want to expand and evolve? You've got to start looking at that. And if you begin to look at this, when you have these different openings, you can really, really change your life. Now, last thought on this is kind of interesting to think about is a personal growth teacher. What is a personal growth teacher doing? Really, if I'm doing my job, I'm applying some pain on you to create urgency to change. So what I might be doing is, rather than waiting for you to go through massive pain, I could be taking you through a different sort of seminar where I'm saying, well, if we look at your life the way it is now, how's it going to wind up? How's that going to feel? What's that going to look like in a week, a month, a year, 10 years? Where's that taking you to? Look at the people that you'll let down. Stop hiding from it. Stop hiding from your pain. And if I do my job well, and because they'll talk about different motivators, like, oh, this person's a motivational speaker. If a motivational speaker does their job well, what they're able to do is to actually expose you to that kind of pain quickly and then snap you out of it, kind of snap all those little kind of things that you're dealing with and get you a fresh start and then begin to set you on a better track. So you'll see over the years, like I remember I'd go see a Tony Robbins seminar. They're like, can he really motivate you and change you? And people are like, you're looking at it like it's a magic pill. He's really putting you through a process. And that's really ultimately where it's coming from. So you can actually do this yourself. I think that you could do a lot. Also, I'm going to tell you something. The major reasons that I do these videos are the following. Number one, selfishly. This is selfish reason I do the videos because I want to get around those rare types of people that are not dealing so much with those different issues that I'm talking about. See, people like that are rare. I want to get around action takers, people that don't focus on BS, people that want to expand and go do cool stuff, people that want to have adventures. So I'll usually run different private groups over the year on different topics and things like that. And I want to get different people in those groups. But those groups, yes, I'm in there and I'm a major component of it, but really it's the quality of the people in the group. So I try to make these videos on the hope that you're not going to watch it for infotainment, but you're going to get to the point where you could add value to a group like that if you ever thought that you're ready to join one of my groups. And people will say, like, you've got to apply to be in a group, and that's sort of like a BS thing that you have to apply. But in my case, it really is that you have to apply. And the reason why is because if people in the group suck and they're stuck in those little 4 things that I'm talking about, that's not going to be a good look for the group, and it actually winds up causing me all sorts of problems. The other reason that I do it is because I want you to use this information to make more money, and ideally to make a ton of money, and do what a lot of my ex-students have done who become current students again, and they wind up building multi-million-dollar companies or even billion-dollar companies, and a bunch of my students have, and they wind up bringing me on to be on their board of advisors, or they wind up hiring me privately, one-on-one, or things like that, and they're successful enough that they can afford to do so. So I'd love for you to do that. I'd actually like you to take this information and go do that. And the last one that's the most important is I want you to actually pay this forward and make the world better so that we don't have to deal with so much crap, and so that my children and your children, all of our children, can live in a better world. So this is why I do that. It is a very, very rare person who is able to operate at that level. And what I would tell you is, if you don't think that you're going to operate at that level, then don't watch this content, because it's just going to frustrate you and it's just going to pull you down a path of false hope. So what you should do instead is, if you are truly, utterly committed to that degree of investing in yourself and taking massive action, if you really are, then keep watching this kind of content. Then if you want, I'll even put a link below, apply to be a part of my private group. I'd be happy to have you. If you're serious about it, if you're not at that point yet that you could add value to it, perhaps join and get better within the group. But you have to be committed to not dragging the group into those traumas and different limitations on your status and emotional addictions and spiritual ailments and so on and so forth. I like to get around people that are not operating at that level. So if you think that's you, maybe, then apply. Okay? Click the link below and apply. I'd love to talk to you about it. We'll have a conversation about it if you're the right fit. In the meantime, we've been talking here today in Redwood about what it means to be somebody who's a 5-figure earner, a 6-figure earner, a 7-figure earner. We've talked about how we get distracted with BS and what BS is, and here what we've talked about are these different ailments that kind of hold you back. I hope this makes a lot of sense to you. I hope that you will use it and make the world better, like I said, and when you do, I'll be very, very proud and excited to chat with you in person. So the first one that we talked about was this idea of status anxiety, and how whatever level you think you're at, if you think that you're a 5 out of 10 in status, you're gonna dress like a 5 out of 10 in status. You're gonna act like a 5 out of 10 in status. Your body language, eye contact, your frame, your control of different social frames, which I've talked about in other videos. All these different things are gonna be dictated by your sense of status. And if anybody ever comes along and suggests something that is above that level of status, it's gonna freak you out. And frankly, if you're somebody at a lower level of status in your mind, you're probably going to want to do things like smoking weed and using a lot of kind of stupid forms of entertainment, and putting a lot of dumb things in your body, and arguing and bickering with people because you feel like there's no downside to it, and so on and so forth. It's not a good thing at all. You're going to wind up missing out really on what the best life has to offer. So how do you get out of it? Let me tell you a couple ways that I got out of it myself. The first one that I did was, I'm sitting here at 42 as I'm recording this. When I was about 20, 21, 22, and for many decades beyond that, I actually started going out to social gatherings. And in different social gatherings, I'd wind up talking to a lot of different people. And what would wind up happening is on a lot of those nights that I went out, or daytimes that I went out, a lot of people didn't like me. And frankly, it really, really burned me and made me feel very, very sad. But sometimes when I would go out, actually a lot of people would really, really like me. And what I found was, if I would have 4 or 5 people in a row that responded well to me, I would wind up basically going into this like total flow state. And what would wind up happening was that my brain suddenly had evidence that I'm not just a 2 out of 10 or 5 out of 10. Maybe in my brain's virtual reality, I'm a 10 out of 10 in that moment. Because really just 4 or 5 people maybe had compassion to talk to the nerdy version of me, not the fun nerd, like the bad version. And what wound up happening was because of that, I wound up getting out of my head for a minute. Now, for a long time, my view was, I need to get everyone to like me all the time so I can feel normal. It actually started to infect me like that. But that was obviously an unhealthy approach. And so what I wound up doing instead was I wound up asking myself, how do I think when I'm getting a lot of social validation? How do I feel in my body when I got a lot of social validation? How do I feel about the world when I got a lot of social validation? Why is it that I'm just able to talk and talk when I have a lot of social validation? Why is it I'm a lot funnier when I have a lot of social validation? Why is it my voice projects perfectly when I have a lot of social validation? And I would start asking myself why, and I would also start tracking how that felt. And so I would kind of memorize the physiology of my body language, memorize the physiology of my eye contact, memorize the physiology of my vocal projection. I would begin to observe how I would control underlying social frames when I felt confident and when I felt good. I would begin to observe how I was able to talk and talk when I felt good. And I began to put that to memory and got it to be, I guess maybe you'd call it a sort of a kinesthetic memory. And I was able to kind of jumpstart that right from the jump. And it was never perfect. It was kind of a Frankenstein-esque version. That's really why you've got to sort out your internal confidence, frankly. But nonetheless, it was good enough and it could get me better results. And then more and more people would like me, and then I'd get more approval and it became easier. Now, over time, I began to realize that I needed to make real deep inner shifts, have a real authentic inner change. That was a couple years later. But look, you know, you kind of got to ride the horse that you're on. And if you haven't reached that point where you've had a deep, authentic level change yet, you can still do the things that I'm saying today or tonight and begin to get a result and get a feel for it, which will then be a further incentive for you to go to that next step. So that was how I was able to solve that kind of inner status anxiety thing. And over the years, I would get into better and better parties. I'd hang out with better and better people. And better people, you know, that's relative. It could be how authentic they are. But I would also hang out with multimillionaires or billionaires. I'd hang out with many of the most attractive people you could find. I'd go to the best parties that are hard to get into, parties that, you know, initially I almost felt like I'm sneaking in, but I would just get used to it. You could even do things like maybe go to a car shop and just sit down in a car way too expensive for you, or go do a house showing in a house that's too expensive for you, or put on, you know, an article of clothing that's too expensive for you. And over time, it winds up getting normalized, and you actually wind up taking on the identity as that person, you become that person. It's a little bit kind of a weird, freaky way to do it. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's kind of haphazard, but in the short term, it works, right? A lot of people would hear this and say, why not just be that person now? Because like me, I'm so perfect is the implied statement. It's a humble brag, because by me telling you to be perfect without all that, I'm saying it about me. And a lot of people say that. And it's funny how in life, you know, if somebody like, say, Dan Bilzerian, who I think is an extremely funny guy, you know, somebody like Dan starts winning, that's fine if Dan does it. It's fine if Brad Pitt does it, Leo DiCaprio does it, but you see some nerdy person who's kind of on their come up, oh, no, 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 no. There's going to be a lot of people having a problem with that, right? The big, tall, jacked, rich person, they can get success, but when you see somebody who's not at a high level getting it, it makes you angry. And then you want to come out like Kraus the Buck and say, no, just keep being yourself. Don't even do that. Just keep being yourself. It's almost like how they'll say work-life balance when somebody's initially building a business, almost as a way of lying to the poor to make them think that they're going to have work-life balance right from the jump. No, I have achieved work-life balance. That's why I'm out here. But in the short term, you might have to hustle, hustle, hustle. It's that jump start. It's almost like a rocket ship that needs rocket fuel to get out of all the gravity. But then once you're in space, you can just do a little ding, ding, and you're just shooting around. That's what a lot of kind of getting out of this stuff comes down to initially. Later, you get to the point where it's not about force, it's about power, as he read in the book Power versus Force by David R. Hawkins, and it gets much, much easier. But we go through these different paradigms to get there, okay? So that's a simple solution for status anxiety. Anybody can go and do it. Few will. Most will insult it, disparage me, disparage you if you're doing it, and so on and so forth, because they're crabs in the bucket. They don't want you to get out of it. You know, they'll find some video of me making a joke that's obviously a joke, make it look real, or they'll look at you and they'll criticize you, because people are haters and they don't want to see the crab get out of the bucket. But if you're out, but then the blessed elite are allowed. It's a different standard. But you've got to decide if you want to stay stuck there, and in my view, you shouldn't. You got to get out of it. Now, the next one that we'll talk about is trauma. And we've got entire courses in our organization about trauma you should look up. And they're very, very powerful. And letting go of trauma means identifying those negative, old, pent-up feelings that you have and actually maybe crying through them or breathing through them in different exercises that you could do. So you can look up other programs or other videos that we've done on this. We've gone very, very deep on it, and I've studied it for years. I've personally done one-on-one trauma work myself for many, many years. And it's funny because when you hear that, it's like, you know, the trauma thing is definitely way overplayed in this day and age. Everybody that drops their pencil is traumatized, and that's where it goes way too far. But the problem is, we have to also acknowledge that at a certain point, you know, the typical experience for a lot of people is they're stuffing down so much trauma, and what winds up happening is, you know, like 40–50% of their mental capital is actually burned on just stuffing it down and ignoring it. You either stuff trauma, you medicate trauma, you run away from trauma, you try to float above trauma, you do anything to get rid of trauma. And you'll see people pumping down drugs and alcohol to try to medicate their trauma, or they try to build a big ego on top of it, or, you know, they get addicted to flow states but they can't actually just sit with themselves, which is good to be in a flow state, but they can't sit with themselves because if they did for even 2 seconds, they'd freak out. And so you've got to make a decision to understand what trauma healing is, and you've got to understand that you're going to have trauma in life, and you've got to understand how to allow that to kind of come to the surface, to bubble up, fully feel it, stop hiding from it, and consciously release it. Very, very powerful. So do that same work. Now, the next one that we talked about is emotional addictions, and the way that you can actually begin to break out of that is what you do is you do things like a positivity challenge. Now again, look at how cheesy all this is, right? Walking around and going to parties where you're nervous, letting trauma bubble up, woo, a positivity challenge, even more woo, right? But end of the day, what's the other answer? And it's always the people that are incredibly negative that will criticize this kind of work. So you've got to make a choice where you stand in that equation. So a positivity challenge is something where you say, you know what, for the next 10 days, I'm not going to complain about anything, and I'm going to reframe it. Now, people in trauma healing work tend to not like things like a positivity challenge because they feel like you're trying to reframe everything to stay positive. My view is that both have their own place, that's all. They each have their own place. I've personally benefited from both. I've seen people that are into trauma healing who, you know, they feel that any feeling is valid, let it bubble up, but then they tend to be very negative in some cases, even though they're trying to release trauma. I've seen cases of that. I've also seen it to where people, they always want to stay positive, everything's icky, sticky, icky, icky, and it's like syrup, and it's like a fairy world, and they wind up doing that, and then what winds up happening is they wind up trying to float above their trauma, and they wind up having this kind of weird personality where it's like, everything is love and light, everything is like, take it easy, everything is love and light, right? And what winds up happening is that their whole world winds up crashing down on them. It's actually very, very sad. And so you don't just want to be the person that just everything's valid, let it all bubble up. You don't want to be the person who everything's love and light, and being in this permanent positivity challenge. It's actually going to mess you up. You don't want that either, okay? You want a bit of both. And I'm actually liking this back view. I'm going to flip this around because I'm liking this back view as well. So I'm going to do this just so we can catch this last little bit as we rock out of here. That's our scene change. Okay, now the last one that we mentioned is this idea of a spiritual ailment. And I talked about this yesterday, that in many different ways, ultimately, there we go.
Told you.
You got me. Okay, so the idea of a spiritual condition. So I talked about this yesterday, how if you actually kind of zone in on where somebody is coming from, I'm gonna do a little wipe here too. There we go. If you actually watch, you know, where somebody is coming from, and you envision it as a spiritual ailment, okay, as spiritual bondage. It's funny what you could derive from this. So the thought experiment that I gave yesterday is, imagine that we come from this beautiful, perfect place, and everything is love and light. No, but actually everything is love and light, okay? So imagine that we come from there. And it's almost like a teenager throwing a temper tantrum. We're like, I hate you, daddy, I'm leaving. And the only way that we can't get sucked back in the abundance and flow and beauty of life is if we just keep being negative and tethering ourselves to our egos and to our enemies and to our frustrations and to our physical body and so on and so forth, as a way to prevent just going into total abundance and total awesomeness. Well, imagine that. And then basically what we're doing is we're finding other co-enablers, people to fight with, people to have opposition to, and so on and so forth. Any way possible to avoid waking up to who we truly are. Well, that is the idea of spiritual bondage. And a way to get out of that is simply to stop just identifying and having your mental dialogue and attachments on the physical world and on who you're against and your ego. And make a decision to feel into that general flow state, to feel into that abundant state. And to allow yourself to identify not just as the body or the ego, but as that state of flow, as that state of abundance. Now, if you've never done work like this, it's very weird, and I get that. I'm not gonna come to you here, like I'm not coming to you here in a turban, although I do have quite the beard, but I'm not coming to you in the turban, and I'm not saying anything that's actually that crazy, even though it sounds like that's someone just getting their hands on it. I've made many other videos where I would go very, very deep on this. What I would just say for this video is just try on that simple thought experiment. Can you get out of your reality for a day and try that as a thought experiment? Basically just observe where you are kind of erotically attaching and enmeshing yourself with your physical attachments, with what people are saying about you, with who you're against, and so on and so forth. Do that. Try just observing that in yourself, okay? Observe that in yourself. And then just allow yourself to go in, like as an experiment, you know, just go to somebody who needs a little bit of help and try helping them, and try giving. As an experiment, just try laughing more. As an experiment, try getting into a flow state more. And then from that flow state, rather than try to control and control and control, just relinquish that control for a minute and allow the energy to move through you. And if you wind up doing that, you're gonna wind up coming from a completely different space, okay? So do that as an experiment. Those are 4 quick experiments that you can actually try just today and right now. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna kind of loosen up those different things that make you hard to relate to, and that over time as you get older tend to calcify and tend to shrink you and tend to extinguish that core essence that you might even call your soul. And what will wind up happening is that you wind up becoming a lot funnier, a lot more talkative, a lot more open. Many of these different problems that you want to solve at a technique level, like tell me what to say, tell me what to do, the answer's just going to start coming to you. And it's a funny thing because if you look at a lot of my content, when I was younger, it was always like very, very step-by-step oriented. And there was a number of people who resonated with that. And as I've gotten older, you know, I'm sitting here and you know, I go into a bar or club, and on many different nights, I don't even talk or do anything, and I wind up meeting people that are very, very cool, very, very attractive, very, very interesting, and we wind up running off and having adventures with each other, and it pains me because, you know, I want to relate to you on do this, do that, do this other thing, but as much as those are training wheels and really great, once you become absolutely electric and learn to let that energy flow through you, you're gonna be in a completely different paradigm. But again, somebody who has that spiritual ailment, who's very, very attached to their ego and the physical, anything that you talk about related to that scares them because it's like a parasitic entity of the mind. And so you'll see a lot of these people are really smart, they got a lot going for them, but you talk about this one topic and they get really, really angry. And they're like, don't look at that and don't say it. There's no validity of that at all. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you think has validity? Results, I'm results oriented. Okay, but my results are better than yours. I don't care and I don't believe it. Well then, why don't we go out to a club together and I'll kind of just show you a little bit about what it's about and hopefully I can help you. No, no, no! And they want to make enemies and talk crap. And you'll see they have like this weird fixation with just deny, 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 deny. Rather than just saying, why don't we just all go out and have fun? Like, why be all weird and crazy, like on the internet or something? Why don't we just go out and have a big party together? Why don't I invite you to my party? We're part of the same kind of like cool clique. And just go have fun together and be in a flow, and then we all just have total abundance of fun. But no, that's all too hard, so let's just sit on the internet going all crazy. It's crazy, 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 and I don't even know what to say to it, so I'm just like, look, I'm gonna be in my flow, I'm gonna be making a lot of money, I'll be having a lot of friends, having a lot of fun, I'll be doing that, I'll be out at the beach, even on a gloomy day, enjoying life. You gotta do what you gotta do, that's all good, that's up to you. But the reason why I do these videos, frankly, there's a couple different ones. One is that I wanna make the world a better place. I want to live in a world with more people coming from a better paradigm, so we don't wind up with things like what happened in 2020, where people are very naive and gullible, and so that we can actually just wind up in a better world in general. Also, I do this because I know that if you listen to what I'm saying, that you're probably gonna wind up becoming very successful, perhaps a multimillionaire or a billionaire, perhaps you're gonna become very socially successful, and many different business opportunities that I benefit from now, and different people have invited me to their board of advisors, people have given me equity in their businesses to help them, are people who I've helped to come up. So I want you to become one of those people. And lastly, this is something that you can do today, is I wanna get people like this into my groups. I do private groups, things like mentoring groups. If you think you're somebody at that level who can add to a group, because the point of these groups is having the best people, click the link below and maybe you can add to it. It's synergistic and we'll add to you as well. Or if you're not there yet, but you want to become that person within the group and you're somebody who's very eyes on the prize and people can actually take you under their wing as a superstar, not as a complainer or somebody kind of stuck in weirdness, but somebody who's in a flow state and having fun. You want to be around other people like that in my group. Click the link below. And we'll start that conversation. And you never know, it could make sense. That really is a hard screen though, because frankly, for those groups to work, you know you're joining it because you want to be both around me, but also other amazing people. So you've got to add to it, and that is a hard screen. Conversely, if you're somebody who doesn't resonate with this, unsubscribe, and I mean that. That's not me being mean. But I make these videos for action takers who will really let it absorb. And the mere act of watching this and not internalizing it, what does that mean? It means that you're basically using it as infotainment and not real life, which actually cheapens the message and cheapens the group. So what I would ask you is honestly to cut the wheat from the chaff and become somebody who's gonna really take action and reach this paradigm and do it, not just talk about it. Or don't cheapen the message and just let it go and go look at TikTok or go look at whatever you want to look at. I don't care. That's up to you. And I'll wish you great love and I'll wish you the best. But ultimately, I'd love to have you along in the journey. We need more people like this. That's why I'm out here sharing this message with you. Be back with more very, very soon. And peace.